So I've been teaching about climate change for 16 years. Eventually got tired of just talking about big solutions. I'd hear people say that we needed to carpool or change our light bulbs, but I was already doing those things. We needed to radically change the way that we use energy. So I decided to build a net zero energy home, one that would produce all the energy that it uses. It also needed to be affordable, so I could demonstrate that everyone could build a passive house like this. These are my kids, Sonia and Olin, and the house that we built. It is because of their future and all of our kids' future that I decided that I had to build a better home. This was our home in Fremont. Craftsman has a lot of character, but they weren't building for energy efficiency back in 1909. We bought some property in Duval, put a fifth wheel on the site, lived in it for 2 winters as we were building. In the whole process, I wasn't held back by the way that homes are normally built, because I had never built a house before. A few things to know about me. I'm frugal, I like to do things myself, and I'm a perfectionist. As a result, I wanted to build something that people said was really difficult to do for my first time, and it had to be perfect. Needless to say, I'm still working on it, even with putting in 8 days a week instead of 3. If we continue to use energy like we have been, we'll see warming of 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Might not seem like much, but 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, if we were sitting where we are now, there'd be 1,000 feet of ice above us, and the average global temperature at that time was only 4 degrees colder than it is today. So a 4-degree temperature warming would be catastrophic for the climate. But luckily, just a few weeks ago, the United Nations, including US and China, signed the Paris Agreement. And the goal is to keep the Earth's temperature from rising no more than 2 degrees Celsius, and ideally keeping it from rising no more than 1.5 degrees. So how can we do it? The only way to meet that goal that we've already agreed to is to reduce our carbon emissions to 0 in the next 35 years. That is an astonishing statement. Our standard of living and ease of life has been increasing for a large part because of the way that we use fossil fuel energy, the way that we use it for transportation, heating our homes, and generating electricity. Our emissions have been going up and up for the last 100 years, and all of a sudden, we need to bring them down to 0 by the time that my 12-year-old daughter is my age. Most people think about transportation when they think about carbon emissions, but it's really the built environment that uses almost half of the energy that we consume. And that's why my goal was to build a net zero energy home. Looking at where we use energy in our home, over half of it's used for space heating and cooling. So that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's where I decided to focus our efforts at first. And the best way to do that is to build an insulated, airtight envelope. So because of the second law of thermodynamics, heat's always going to travel from a hot area to a cold area. You can't prevent it. The only thing you can do is slow down the heat transfer. And that's what you do with super insulated walls and airtight building assemblies. There's 100 ways to do it. I happen to go with the double stud wall, using OSB as an air barrier, sealing every seam with Prozocco's air and joint seam. There's the HRV. And then fill the 16-inch depth cavity with dense packed cellulose because it's renewable, sustainable, and old newspapers are cheap. So the moment of reckoning with the blower door test, I had a one shot on this. I came in at 0.4 air changes per hour, so well below the 0.6 for passive house standards, showing you that if you do it once, you do it right. I was actually wondering why it was not 0. I was wondering, where's the air coming from? I was told at one point that to meet passive house standards, the total sum of all the air leakage can be no more than an index card in the area. Shortly after we did the blower door test, I realized where the leak was. The P-trap. I had not yet I wasn't finished with the kids' bathroom yet, so we hadn't used the tub. So there was no water blocking the P-trap, so I had a 2-inch diameter hole that air was rushing into while we were doing the blower door test. So now it's performing well below 0.4 air changes per hour. So I was really excited to see how the house was going to perform. Before we turned on the heating system last year, I took temperature probes inside and outside the house, and in Seattle on a cold night, when we would turn off the heat, it would cool down to about 50 degrees by morning. So I figured with a super insulated and airtight assembly, maybe we'll cool down to 50 degrees over the course of 4 days. I was wrong. This is the actual temperature performance. So inside the house, you can see that it cooled down at night, warmed up during the day. Cooled down at night, warmed up during the day. That's without having any heating system on. So even on November overcast days, there was enough solar gain coming into the south-facing windows to provide all the house energy needs, the heating needs anyway. In fact, friends of ours for a housewarming gift gave us a backup heating system for the house, which is very thoughtful. How often do you get that for a housewarming? In fact, they gave us a hair dryer because the heating load is 1,800 watts. So on the coldest day of the year, we can heat it with the hair dryer. Or if you're out of power, you just invite 18 friends over, and you have enough body heat to heat your house. So taking a look at, now that we've been in the house for over a year and a half, we can take a look at how we've done in terms of our energy consumption. So we've brought our heating and cooling down to 10% of the average house, the hot water down to about 1/5 of the average house. So combining all that together, of course using heat pumps wherever possible, we are now using 20% of the energy compared to a standard cold-built house, which is great, but it's not zero. So to get it to zero, put 10 kilowatts of solar panels on the roof, because the house is performing better than anticipated. That will provide not only all the energy that the house needs, but enough for 2 electric cars driving a total of 18,000 miles a year. So we now have 0 carbon footprint for our house, 0 carbon footprint for our transportation. Which means we can finally get rid of the Subaru, which is on its last legs, and get an electric car. So in terms of cost, it's $27,000 for the PV system. But you're saving $1,000 a year in electricity that's being produced. You're saving $2,000 a year because you're not paying for gasoline. So that system will pay for itself in 7 years. So you have a more comfortable house, more energy efficient, better air quality. What's not to love about it? Everybody's happy, including the goats. So now that we can think about why would you not want to build a house this way? Well, the answer, of course, is it's more expensive. But let's take a closer look at that. So we spent $23,000 beyond code, which is about 4% of the cost to build. And comparing that with actual professional builders, that's about in the ballpark for passive house construction. So taking a look at that, that's about 11-year return on investment because of $2,000 we're saving every year. 11-year payback, 7 years for the panels. It sounds pretty good, except for someone who might say, I might only be in my house for 3 or 5 years. Well, there's another way of thinking about it. All of these extra costs are just being rolled into the mortgage. So for our house, we're paying an additional $1,300 a year for the cost beyond code, but we're saving over $2,000 in reduced energy costs. So we're actually having a net saving of almost $800. With the solar panels, same thing. Our net savings is almost $1,500. So every year we are saving over $2,200 for a better built, more efficient, more comfortable home. It's a no-brainer. Why would you not build like this? You get a better house for less money. You solve the insurmountable problems of climate change, fossil fuel addiction, energy independence. You never pay for gasoline, electricity, or natural gas again. The problem is, that's just one house. To meet our energy, our climate change goals, every house needs to be built to these standards. So that's just one drop in a very big bucket. So if we're going to meet those goals, every time I drive around and I see a house under construction that's only built to code, I get a sinking feeling in my gut because I know that that house is bringing us much closer to 4-degree warming. So if you ever have a client that wants to build a house only to code, ask them if they really want a cold and drafty home and are willing to pay more for it. If they want to know what it's like to design, build, and live in a net positive energy home, have them contact me because I am on a mission to revolutionize the building industry. Thank you.